Hey there guys, welcome to another 5 Minute Fridays episode. In this episode we're going to be learning about CSS variables and how we can use them to write cleaner and more efficient code. If you guys are new here and like the content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Now, most programming languages have support for variables, but sadly this wasn't always the case with CSS, which at the beginning lacked support for variables, and the only way to use variables in CSS would have to access them through a preprocessor like Sass. However, the world of programming and design works extremely fast and adapts just as quickly, so I'm now glad to report that CSS finally supports variables. So what we're going to do now is dive into VS Code and learn how to create and use these variables. Okay, so we're inside VS Code, and inside our HTML here you can see we have some really basic content. So we've got our header here which has a h1 inside of it with the content of CSS variables. Underneath this we've got a main semantic tag which has 3 divs inside of it, each with a class of boxes, and there's a paragraph tag with some dummy text inside of these too. Now this folder here has an external style sheet which we've linked up here inside the head tag. So if we go inside the style sheet here, you can see already some of the basic styling we've applied to our content, which you can see here to the right. So to our H1 you can see here we've applied a color, some text alignment, a font size and some margin. And then to each of the boxes we've given them a border, applied some margin to these and some width, also a border radius and some padding. And again, all of the colors here are this orange red. Now in the body you can see we've used a linear gradient too, just to give the background a nice color. Now there's nothing wrong with all of this code here, it works perfectly fine and you can easily write out a project like this. However, something that you might run into later is if you want to change the color theme, or you want to change the font size between your headings, or things of that kind of nature. This could become a colossal task, as projects will be many more lines of code, not merely these 20 plus lines that you see here in our example. So this is when CSS variables can come into play. So the first thing we want to do here is just have a place to store our variables. Now if you're familiar with JavaScript, you know that variables have either a global or a local scope. Well, the same thing can actually be applied to CSS variables, and the easiest way for us to manage our CSS variables is by declaring them in the root pseudo class. So we'll go above the body here and we'll just insert the root pseudo class. And this root selector here allows you to target the highest level element in the DOM, or the document tree, which is the HTML document itself. And given the fact that CSS variables follow the rules like any other CSS definition, having them inside the root selector will ensure that all selectors will gain access to these variables. So now we have a place to store our variables, let's start creating some. So we'll go inside the root selector here, and to create a variable you first need to use 2 dashes, so dash dash and then the name of that variable. So I want to create a variable for the main text color, so main txt color, and I want that color to be green. And then I also want a main background color, so dash dash main bg color, and the color I want this to be, let's just do that orange red. And what I also want is just to have a variable for the divs, so to create some margin between them. So again, dash dash div margin, let's make it about 20 pixels. So now we've created these variables and have globally scoped them and are neatly ordered, we can start putting them to action. So to use these variables we need to reference them, and we do that with the var function. So what I'm going to do is go inside the h1 where we have the color for it, and I grab the var function and I want to apply the main text color to this h1, and as you can see in the browser now it's changed to the color of green, which is the value of our variable there. And I also want to do that to the dummy text. So we'll grab the var function again and we'll say main text color. Now what I also want to do is use that main background color of the orange red for our boxes. So we'll go underneath the color here and we'll say background color, and we'll grab the var function and we'll say dash dash main bg color. And as you can see, that variable now is applied to our boxes and they have that orange red background color. And then the last thing we'll do is just put a bit of space between them all, so we'll use the div margin variable. So we'll go inside the margin here, grab the var function and we'll say div margin, so just to give them some space. Now you may be wondering what the benefit is here, but the true magic of CSS variables is in the fact that we now have a reference point in the root selector. So again, in this example you can see we only have about 30 lines of code, whereas in a real life example we'd have many lines of code with many more bits of content and elements. And say we get a change of heart later on about the color theme or the color of the text, or maybe we want to put a bigger margin between the boxes here, or even change the main background color. If we're dealing with many lines of code, which we would be if we're in a big project, we'd have to manually scour our code to change the values, whereas now with our CSS variables that we've created here, we can just change them in the root. So let's just say we want the main background color of our boxes to be, let's say purple. We don't have to go individually into the boxes, we can just change them up here in the root. So we'll say purple, and as you can see it's changing all the background colors for our boxes. And let's just say we want to change the main text of the color to white, we can do it here. And let's just say we want some of the margin between our boxes to be even bigger than they are now. We can go inside the variable here and change the value inside here, so we add more space there. So as you can see, having variables in our CSS not only saves time, but is more efficient and encourages better coding practice. So those are CSS variables in a nutshell, guys. To summarize, we create CSS variables using the 2 dashes here, followed by the name and then the value. And then we can organize and globally scope them inside the root pseudo selector. And the main benefit of these variables is the ability to change the values in our projects without the need to manually go through our code and change our values. We can just change them here in this section. So that's going to be it for this 5 Minute Fridays episode, guys. If you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button and please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time.